Library, Historical Society, and Goodwill House presentation, continuing series of Knox Trail talks. Welcome all. We have a great crowd here in the library and another 20 or 30 people on Zoom. So hi all on Zoom. Please make sure on Zoom that you're muted. Without further ado, it's really my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Ron Bernard, who's going to talk about an aspect of the Knox Trail, but particularly dealing with the taverns that may have and likely did support the Teamsters as they came through, and many other people along the way. Ron is one of the authors, and he may mention, of the forthcoming book, Ye Trodden Path, that will be coming out hopefully in a month or two, very soon. It's at the printers, but it will be coming out, and we'll let people know when that is ready for people to get copies of. So again, it's my pleasure, Ron.
It is your pleasure, yes. Any questions? So thanks for coming. This is the third talk in a series of 5 that we planned, and there was all the hullabaloo that a couple of weeks ago. We're kind of worried that people by now might be getting knoxed out or over-knoxed, but it would be obnoxious for us. I'll stop for now. I have a few others for you. I'm going to introduce 2 related subjects that have gotten short shrift or no shrift at all in the grand story of the Knox Trail and the road that it was long before Knox. And so it's high time that we talk about those. And one is the roads in America, and the others is the taverns that were in Sandusfield, to some extent in Otis. After that, we'll talk about another subject, if there's time, that's related to that. But first of all, does anybody know what Sandusfield's claim to fame is? You know Sandusfield? No? Sandusfield's claim to fame is that nobody knows anything about it. It's a dubious claim. And maybe we're going to put a little dent into that with the Knox celebrations. And with that, Sandusfield's place on the Knox Trail. It's the only town that does not have a monument. And it's been really forgotten. And yet there's a very rich history of the trail that went through Sandusfield and the taverns that supported it. And I'll talk to you about that tonight. So this is, sometimes towns have mottos, and that, close as I can tell, where the hell is Sandusfield is a motto. This was a bumper sticker a few years ago. I think you had something to do with it. It really is a brilliant marketing strategy. You use the negative to create interest and curiosity and everything, and so we're thinking about doing it again. But this period is actually going to help us on the way to increase awareness and on our goal to getting a monument and getting people more interested in that. So you have here is a slide by the University of Massachusetts, and it depicts the major trails that existed in 1600 and 1650. I have no idea how they did it. I'll take your word for it. But these are just the major trails. In fact, if you put yourself back into the year 1640, if you can, 20 years after the first English settlers came, 20,000 English, I presume mostly English, came on 200 ships. They landed in Boston. If they were greeted with a huge wall of green giant trees and impenetrable, nobody would go anywhere. But they had these roads and trails that existed that allowed western expansion all the way almost across the country, well into the Midwest, of course. It might be completely different if they showed up into a total wilderness, and who knows about that. But that's a very precious legacy that was left to them by indigenous people. It's the estimates vary widely, very tremendously wide, from 2 to 18 million pre-Columbian, and the number that I've seen in most publications is 3 to 4 million Indians were in North America. Well, that's a lot. And they were mostly permanent settlements, especially around here. So they had trails that took them to hunting grounds, to other parts of their community or other communities for trading, war parties perhaps. And those trails are ancient. Some of them are, pick a number, they could be 1,000 years old or more. They were originally animal vectors that became hunting paths for the animals, that became regular trails and then roads and highways, and ended up at I-95 from Maine to Florida. There's a trail that connected all the way down. So in these towns, if you're from a town like Sandusfield or any of these towns around here, not Great Barrington so much, but places that aren't built up, you'll notice that the roads are crazy. They don't, there's no rectangles. Everything is winding around, avoiding mountains and going by rivers and everything. And if you look on a map, it looks just nuts. No planning at all, but actually there's logic to it if you think about it. These trails tend to run, in the grand scheme, they tend to run north-south. Why? Rivers, right? Around here, they go everywhere. Also rivers. You'll see that many streets in your towns end up at a river or at another trail that goes through a river. So the hunting ground, the river, all connected. And that's why it looks so nutty. I'll be talking about Spectacle Pond, which is not too far from here. It's very close to the Knox Trail, and it was a road. That road allowed the Mohegans from the upper Hudson Valley, not very far away, to get to their hunting ground there. And there are all sorts of monuments that they built and left. If there's time, I'll get into that a little bit, but I think that's an important part, and there's no time to talk about that story today. Slide. So, how could one little path have so many names, colloquial names? There's at least 24 that we found. There's another one over here, Brewer's Hill Road. I think there's another one. I didn't have that on the map, right? Yeah. The name of the book is Ye Trodden Path. That's a 17th century name. The first couple of ones up there are also 17th century. You'll see in 1737 it's called the Great Road. If there ever was a misnomer, this is it. It wasn't great and there was no road. But I love it. And this was used quite a bit. When these townships were being planned in the 1730s, Tyringham and Sandusfield especially were built around the position of this road. So, for example, go to the next slide. Here, okay, you see this is Spectacle Pond. This is where the taverns were, and I'll get into that. You see this line right here? So they drew that line, that's a road. And then the lots were built on either side of it, so there's less legal problems and rights of ways and so forth. They were thinking already about it. The surveyors purposely did that. Now, I would say this, historians are not much interested in writing about roads. It's sort of a not very sexy subject. No people, actually, no heroes, no information. But I'm telling you that roads, rivers, and the U.S. Postal Service is what made this country as a country. Those three things. So next time you're going around and cursing at the hill over here, or the many turns and what, don't think about it. Those were the paths of people long before us. So now we'll switch to taverns. Little primer on the New England taverns. They're rooted in 17th century British custom. And they were among the very first public buildings in this new nation in the 1600s. The taverns tended to be community centers the D&Bs, the restaurants, the places where you go, drink until you drop. So many things. There were actually American-oriented taverns as you approach the Revolution, and British-oriented taverns, red and blue, if you will. And in these taverns, if the Americans were red, as I like to think, they were talking insurrection. They were talking what to do after independence. This was a very important place. But the taverns were central to community life. They had food and drink and lodging, and also the tavern keepers were substantial people. They might have been military officers. They're high-ranking and community members. It reflects the social acceptability of what they were doing. They provided warm, welcoming environment, also featuring a fireplace, a tap room for drinking, and even a ballroom. I think the New Boston Inn is all of these things. And it goes on and talks about the gender access. Did women frequent the taverns? Not too much, except in New Hampshire, for some reason. They were frequented by women who engage in social activities like smoking and dining, like today. But this is not the taverns that we've had here in the Greenwoods. Oh, no. There were upper class and lower class taverns, and we didn't have any upper class taverns. Here's an interesting thing I picked up. Conflicting views of taverns is held by eminent 18th century English and American gentlemen. From Dr. Samuel Johnson. There's nothing which has yet been contrived by man by which so much happiness is produced as by a good tavern or inn. John Adams, on May 30th, 1760, said, several county towns within my observation have at least a dozen taverns and retailers. Here the time, the money, the health, and the modesty of most that are young and many old are wasted. Here diseases, vicious habits, bastards, and legislators are frequently begotten. So the reality is in this quote I found. In the backwoods taverns were wretched hovels, dirty with vermin for company. Even so, they were safer and more pleasant for the stranger than camping by the roadside. Even on the Boston Post Road, travelers routinely reported about bad food, hard beds, scanty blankets, inadequate heat, and poor service. I want to give a nod to my fellow historian, Lorraine German, who I think is watching tonight. Hello, Lorraine. She wrote a little bit in the history book of Sanesfield, and she said, in part, tavern lodgings where anything was suitable by today's standards, and total strangers often had to share beds and chambers that could be stifling or hot or cold or drafty. Another writer wrote, the tavern keeper would be a prominent, respected citizen. He had to have a safe place for baggage, horses, or money. If a traveler was sick or unhappy, everything possible must be done for his relief. Simple food of good quality must be served, and some carried their own food. A regular meal was 25 cents, lodging 10 cents. The bedrooms, double beds with feather beds, homemade blankets, patchwork quilts. Sheets were not mentioned, but if they had them, they were homegrown. Possibly this meant men lying down in a semicircle around a fireplace in a barroom or parlor. Now, I'm 80, almost 81 years old, and I have noticed that irony is a big part of life. It happens almost every day. And so I see those men lying in a semicircle, filthy, probably not smelling too good men. And I was reminded of them last night when my furnace went busted. And there I was, lying in front of the fireplace, getting up every hour to put logs in. And just got, pretty much the same thing, except that there were no smelly men to deal with. I don't know. We're going to get through this one. Another quote here. This is from early roads and settlements of Berkshire County. Very good. Historians know this very well. 1886. And it talks about our particular route here. It is a road of great historic interest from its unwritten history as an Indian trail, the probable route of Major Talcott in his pursuit and fight with the Indians in southern Berkshire in 1676, to the opening of the Western Railroad. Over it passed the founders of most of the towns of southern Berkshire and early commerce between them and their neighbors east and west. General Amherst and his army in 1759, the soldiers of the Revolution, Burgoyne and his captured army on their way to Boston, the soldiers of 1812-15, and many a weary pilgrim long since passed away has enjoyed the hospitality of its numerous taverns of bygone days. And this is 1886, so he's really talking to him, way back. And the words are still true today. Okay, Gene. All right, so this is a postcard picture from about 1900 of Sandusville Center. The house on the left is the Jabez Bosworth Tavern, and that's a Congregational Church, a beautiful church that burned in 1908. The first church, that's the third church that stood there. The first church was basically a barn-like building put up in 1852. Jonathan Edwards, a famous legendary person in these parts, installed the first pastor. His name was Reverend Cornelius Jones, a 1752 Harvard graduate and a fellow with a very bright future, married to Sandusville girl. Historian Elijah Smith said he was dismissed in 1761, which sounds strange to me even today, but it was said that he made 2 frequent trips carrying his rum jug to the Captain Jabez Bosworth Tavern just across the bridge. And I'll go with that. Let's see if we can find that tavern. Next slide. There it is. This is probably the oldest surviving building in Sandusville. It dates to late 1759, maybe 60,
54.
something like that. 54. Okay. Nobody knows for sure, but it appears that, and it probably was the tap room, and it was the former home of Liana, and she can't deny it because I know you lived there.
And just as drafty as 1774.
Yeah. All right. Slide, please. All right, so we'll get into the taverns of Sandusville now. There were 5 taverns, believe it or not, within a mile or 2 of one another. I always thought that there would be one tavern in a town. There was a requirement to establish a town. You had to have a tavern every 10 to 15 miles, depending on the terrain, the distance a man and a horse can make in one day. Is really very important, a tavern, a church, and provisions for roads and schooling. These are the things that townships had to agree to before they got incorporated. So it turns out there were 5 here, and on the Great Road, or not so Great Road, there it is. So we're over here, I think, today. So I'll talk about these taverns. There were 2 in close proximity right there at Upper Spectacle Pond. One of them was the Ezekiel Thomas Tavern. This was the first. There is this little land right in here between was not designated as a lot for sale, and the Bay Colony granted the 20 acres, very irregular lot, to Ezekiel Thomas. He wasn't there very long, but in his deed it specified he's going to have a building and settle, which he did. So that was probably the first tavern there. And then just a few hundred yards away, number 1 was Jonathan Wapples. Jonathan came from Farmington, Connecticut, and he came to Tyringham, as many of them did, because Tyringham was settled before Sandusville. There were people here, a lot more people earlier, 1752-53. Wapples was the surveyor for Tyringham. His wife taught school, and he bought a series of parcels, and he built a tavern. In 1765, he bought out, Ezekiel left town in 1763, and he bought that property through 2 other people. And now he had 2 taverns, and he had a community. He had a house that he lived in, probably, and rented some rooms there. Basically, these were like B&Bs. And then he had Ezekiel Thomas's place. And then really now makes sense to me, because George Shepard, writing in 1885 about the Spring Tavern, this Wapples Spring Tavern, said that they often had as many as 20 horses. And that's all he said about the thing. I'm thinking, 20 horses? That means at least 20 people, and maybe more than that. And how do you put them up? Well, he had these two houses. And that's how it had to be. So the remains of the Wapples Tavern is there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically. But that's where it all started. Now you see, the other thing about it is it's close to water. If you have 20 horses, you need water, a lot of it, right? So it's no accident that they would locate around there. Next, yeah. All right, so here's Edward Nero. Some of you know this man is a longtime DCR employee, and he, I don't know how he did it, but he spent his life mapping Berkshires and other places, Pennsylvania. He would draw maps, he would take photographs, he'd write all the deeds and how they related. It's unbelievable. And he, in 1966, did a full survey of the Knox Trail. No one else had done this. And so some of what we're talking about today is, so here's the property that was Ezekiel Thomas's, and then Wapples was right about here, and that's how we know. Next slide. These are some of his notes. I'm lucky to get, this is a picture which I got too late to put in our book, but I got it here. I'll tell you about it. This is the remains over here of the Thomas Tavern. And when Nero went back in the late 70s, he said this, he writes about it right here. It's all wooded over, and you can hardly see it. So I think Tom and I are going to take a walk one day and we'll try to find those ruins. My name was brought to the attention of more than one authority connected with the Henry Knox Trail, but not contacted. No one ever contacted me during the celebration of 1976. He was really, really disappointed. So, Edward, this is your time to shine. I've got him in the book, and thank you very much. But you did, unsung. At least we have the picture there. There's a tavern here, 3. It had to be around here. I don't know if you'd be aware, this is Otis today, but before 1818, it was the Bethlehem District, unincorporated. Sandusfield, because it was already established, had a town clerk and records, and was the administrative caretaker until they could become either their own town or part of the town. And so I haven't been able to locate any specifics about Ezekiel Sumner, but he came from Middletown, Connecticut, and like most of the early settlers of these towns, the very first ones came with adult children, a lot of them. How else could they possibly carve out a place to live or make a pasture or do anything? And so there were very few young children in these parts in the 1750s and 60s. And then they intermarried and they got a lot of children. It happens. So we'll go back to it. Sorry. So he had a tavern here. I found a reference that he would frequent the Clark store in Tyringham, and the store means that's where he bought his liquor and whatever they needed. So it was up around here. Today it's part of Otis. Let's see where we're going. His wife. No, his sister Susan, is a central figure in the story of the 5 taverns of Sandusfield, because she married Ichabod Crittenden, also from Middletown. And Ezekiel Sumner owned land over here, and he sold it to Ichabod right here, right? And building's still there, you'll see. And they had a daughter, Hannah, and Hannah Crittenden married James Adams, who had a tavern here. So you had a marriage connection all the way through. And the first time I knew this, so I was thinking about it, you know, it's operating like a co-op. Most of these taverns were a couple of bedrooms maybe, and you know, what happens in times of overflow? Well, they would cooperate. Their families are intermarried, connected, everybody could pitch in, and if one tavern needed more help, someone would go over there. It's a fascinating subject. It's worthy of research and an article someday. All right, so now we're going to go down here. This is Beach Plain Road, and it's about about a mile from the Great Road right here. Right. This building, this is a picture from about 1890. It subsumed into this building, which was put up in 1930, I mean. And it is probably, well, it's part of the Crittenden Tavern. So that's how it looks today. So I've got to sort of shuffle off a little bit to the side and talk about the barn. This is the Crittenden barn. In 1885, the property was owned by Lyman Waters. And after Lyman's wife died of some horrible disease, he got religion in a big way, became an extreme religious person, let's put it that way. There's newspaper articles about it from back then, and every stone, every building, every post, anything that wasn't moving, and maybe even the animals, I don't know, had aphorisms on there. You know, the end is near, all that stuff. And it was all over the farm. It was called Amen Farm or Scripture Farm. Pretty cool. And so I think if you ever run across that, you'll get a chuckle out of it. But Amen Farm, and it's right around the corner from me. So that takes us down to the fifth tavern, which was the James Adams Tavern. It was called the Judd. Most taverns had a name. I think Henry Springs was the Continental Tavern. We've only seen one reference to that. I don't know if the others had names, but the Judd was on the road. And this house, which is existing today, the barn is not, is on North Beach Plain Road, and this was the homestead of the Adams family. They came in the 1760s and they built a mill at the Spectacle Pond. It was first thing that the settlers had to have is a mill, right? They needed lumber to build their own house. They needed potash and things that could be ground at the mill, and flour and all that. And so mills were really essential, and the Adams pioneered that whole section of Sandusfield, and that's their house there. All right. See if I missed anything on the towers. The vermin, yeah. Yeah, so what were they like? In contrast to taverns that are like the New Boston Inn and the grand structures that were in the east, the taverns here were basic house, maybe salt box type. Sometimes a farmer's house that turned into, a tavern. In Sandusfield, there were at least 40 people. Persons got licenses, not the businesses. Between the 1750s and about 1840. After 1840, most of the taverns are gone. Some of them hung on, but the better roads came in the 1820s, and so you didn't need a tavern or several every 10 or 15 miles. So they abruptly quit. Now the Henry Spring Tavern, I told you, is the most important tavern. That was right up here, right in there. There's remnants that were found in 1979, and one of the buildings was 52 by 30 something square feet. That's big. So he had the 20 horses, and he had the buildings to support it. He believed that the tavern closed in 1778, which was early, He died in 1803, and there are no more licenses with the spring name attached to it. So that was over. But for the 10 years or so that he had it after Wapples, it was a happening place. You had armies coming back and forth. The Burgoyne contingent of at least 2,000 people, including camper. What do you call them? Camping hangers on. Camp followers. Camp followers. Yeah, had them. You had all the Hessians, who wish they were back in Germany, and they all came through at once. Can you imagine the scene? 2,000 people, and they stayed at the Spring Tavern. In one day, he sold 64 gallons of rum. I mean, they loved rum. There was a lot of drinking in these places. And in fact, I'm going to be opening up a franchise for my latest drink. It's called Flip. And actually, this was the most popular drink in American taverns for a long time. Flip is a colonial era warm alcoholic drink usually consumed before bedtime. First mentioned in England 1685, and ingredients: beer and rum, egg and cream, molasses or cane sugar, pumpkin optional, scalded in a glass with a hot fireplace poker, garnished with nutmeg. So they take a hot poker called loggerhead, and put it in there to warm it up, and everybody did this. And I think we could bring this one back. So that's a little bit about taverns, public houses, inns, whatever you like to call. They had different names, but they were essential, I think, to survival, getting from one place to another. How brutal these paths were, and they were there. So I wish I could have seen it, but we can talk about it. So now, any questions?
I have a question about those taverns and how they function. I was just this week looking at the ledgers for the Captain Marsh Tavern over in Stockbridge.
Yeah.
Not only selling a lot of alcohol, but lots of goods as well. So it must have been a combined store and tavern. How common was that?
Yeah, well, of the 5 that I showed you that I know of, the James Adams had a hotel and store.
And a store. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so taverns, you could have inns that weren't taverns because they didn't have a liquor license. So the tavern kind of tells you that there was, that going on in great, tremendous quantities. Mm-hmm. Probably led to, Carrie-Nation and that whole Prohibition era. Mm-hmm. Started in the 1830s, I think, and it's...
Well, the water was the same to drink.
The water. They have the same problem today.
Or else it's hard cider with some alcohol in it, right?
A lot of hard cider, a lot of rum, right?
Hi. When you talked about a mill, Spectacle Pond, there was a mill at the dam at the upper Spectacle, and then there's a couple of mills at the dam on the brook that goes to the Clam River.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about? Or?
Yes, right.
Okay.
So I think the Adams, that was their property. And that farm, if you drive up Cold Spring Road, if you're familiar with that, you'll see this old farm with a giant barn, and there's sort of a falling down blue house and a red house, and little outhouses everywhere, and that's all been taken down last week. It's gone. All but one building saved. And it's a farm that may be the longest continuously operated farm anywhere by one family. You can find some farms that are 1760s and 50s maybe somewhere in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, but not by the one family. So it was the Adams family, and they had it. The last one married a Hawley girl. Her brother was bequeathed, the farm was bequeathed to them. He had it for about 100 years. His last daughter married the Rowley girl, I don't know, in 1910, something like that. And they've had it all the way up to when the state bought the property, and it's now Spectacle Pond Farm. And so I live down the street from that, I know it very well. It's really sad to see something like that go. There was no practical way to save it or use it, or, what are they gonna do? So it was deteriorating while they were debating what to do for about 10 years, further deteriorating, and finally the decision was made, the contracts will let. And all those buildings are gone, except one building. It's an abattoir, or slaughterhouse, or as my neighbors call it, the piggery. That's the colloquial name for that. And I've offered my services to be a docent if the DCR ever wants to have some of the children come, or you or anybody. I don't know the first thing about killing pigs, but I'll learn. And they did a great job in restoring it, and I'm glad that somebody had foresight to do it. Although the building is standing there now, lonely, out of context, just there, and what can we do to sort of bring some context to that? Hopefully something.
So when you go past that old farm,
Yeah.
and it starts to curve around,
Right.
there's a road that goes through there.
Yes, right.
Does that road go up to where the Adams?
Yeah, that is
where
it.
the Adams
That is it.
Tavern would have been?
Yeah, no, not Adams. The Adams Tavern, go back a couple slides. Okay, right. Adams was right here, in this little corner, right? And this road is the one you're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
I've never been up it. It's discontinued a long, long time ago. A friend of ours lives in a house here. That was Spring. So the Springs left. There's Spring up here. Their tavern closed in 1778. They continued to farm. They owned a lot of land here, and then they gave all that up. The state eventually bought it all, and they moved down to down here, and also further down the Beach Plain. So the Springs are still in Sandusville, the original family. It's the last one. And if you look in your own towns, if you do the research, you're going to find very few original names. Everybody left. We had 300 Smiths in Sandusville, and they're all gone. Not a single one. So we can only talk about them.
Question. Just thinking, practice of, I'm sorry.
No, speak up.
In the event, I'm thinking of, maybe they weren't so remote, I don't know how large the communities were in those particular spots, but in the event of disputes or thefts, I mean, did they experience a lot of theft? I mean, I'm assuming there were no policemen of any sort from the 18th century.
The question is, these communities dispersed, was there theft? I don't think so. They were very tight. I mean, within one generation, so many families intermarried. They were socially they made the towns and the sections socially cohesive. Everybody knew everybody. And by the way, the populations were much bigger than they are now. Sandusville is about 900, and at its height, it was 3,100. It went down to 300 after World War II.
Wow.
So, they've suffered the ups and downs. We don't really have a lot written about the criminal events. There are a lot of serial arsonists, however. Another subject. Maybe I'll do that lecture over in Stockbridge or something. Yes.
I'm just curious if you could tell us some of the old names that are gone, and/or where there's cemetery names.
Sure.
I like to visit the cemeteries, but if you could just name some of those old names,
I'll tell
the
you
ones that are all gone.
The town was founded by the Browns. I'm writing a book about them right now. They had 5 sons and 2 daughters, all adults. John Brown, Colonel John Brown, was a hero of the American Revolution. He was the enemy of Benedict Arnold. He was a Washington favorite. He was killed in Palatine, New York, in the Battle of, what is it? Help me out here.
Stone Arabia?
Stone Arabia, right. Yeah, 37 years old. Had he lived, there's no doubt that John Brown, not the one that was involved with slavery later, but this John Brown would have been right up there with the Founding Fathers. He was that impressive. Yale graduate, lawyer, Pittsfield claims him, which is illegal because he was raised in Sandusfield. Where's Sandusfield? I don't know. We had Demings, we had Smiths, we had 5 families of Smiths. Smith everywhere, all gone. There were Bosworths came in, mostly from Connecticut. And most of the early wave, the first wave, 1760 to 1780, people came from Connecticut. 2 reasons. They recruited down there. And the other one is they had trails that go north-south on the rivers. If you had to come from Boston or Cape Cod across Granville and that hill with your horses and family, can you imagine, right? It was much easier to go north and south, as people had been doing for centuries. So that's another influence. But these towns were founded by people from Farmington and Wethersfield and Hartford and Glastonbury and all these towns in central Connecticut. Also New London and Norwich, not from there. Deming, very big.
Still
right?
around, right?
Yes, well, actually, none are still living in Sandusfield, but there is one in Tolland, the son of Francis Deming. Some of you might remember Francis, he died a few years ago. And they qualify as being, descendants of original settlers, but there's nobody living in town now.
Would the Demings have been from Connecticut originally?
No. They Eastern Massachusetts. Yeah. The very first ones, Browns and Smiths, came from Massachusetts, and they were connected with the general court. They were, so they got land grants, and that's how these towns started. They were called proprietors. They were given all this land. They had to promise to settle it. They had to promise to put the tavern, the church, the roads, and all that stuff. And they had to promise to go find settlers, and they did. And they got rich for the times because they could sell their properties. So that's how you got to start somewhere, and that's how it happened here.
Could you say the Corey family, the gentleman's first name again? Did you say Corey?
No.
The Brown family?
Browns, Smiths, Demings, Bosworths. Those are the main ones that came the very first days.
Oh, I must have misunderstood. I thought you mentioned something about the Brown family and the Coreys.
No.
No?
I don't think so.
Ron, I think earlier in your talk you mentioned that dinner was 25 cents and a room was 10 cents.
Yeah.
What?
That equates to about $200 today.
Oh wow. Okay, so that kind of maybe answers my question a little bit. But why was the room cheaper than the dinner?
Share it. Yeah, just share it.
Oh, okay.
7 other guys.
That's fair.
The reason for asking about the Demings coming from Connecticut is because there are quite a few with that name going back to the 1700s in the Granby, Simsbury, North, almost next to Granville. So
very big family, Demings, all over southern New England, and intermarried, Connecticut, Massachusetts. The border didn't mean very much in those days, They were moving around a lot. What happened was, in Connecticut especially, you had, by 1750, towns were already 120 years old. They'd already gone through 3-4 generations. They had big families and land. The farms weren't that big to begin with, and it got chopped up. The oldest son got it, and the others were out, and so they moved, and that's what happened. So it was just, they were forced to leave. And land was cheap here and available and very, very hard. I respect them very much. I mean, I've got one night without heat, right?
So according to Google, 25 cents in 1776 would be worth approximately $10 in today's money. They can't, exactly correlated because the currency changed, it wasn't the dollar, but roughly, so it's not, sorry, it wasn't $200.
This is Jane, my wife and handler.
Fact checker.
Fact checker, everything.
She's a manager.
Okay, one last thing, maybe Rob, you're gonna mention the book. All right, there is a book that we've been working on. These 5 guys, I call it our nursing home picture. Normally men stand up and everything. We're missing blankets, maybe for the next time. But we've been working on this. You all know Bernie Drew, and he's the author of 62 books. More than half of those are about local history. I've got a few. Gary's got a bunch. And Rob here has got all his books up here. He knows more than any of us. So we got together and produced a book called Ye Trodden Path, History of the Knox Trail, and examination of the longest original section of the trail. Well, I should have mentioned that. The trail through Sandusfield is about 5 miles, and there's 2 more miles in Otis. And it's virtually original. There's nothing on it anymore. And it's protected under Massachusetts State, Otis State Forest for the most part. So when you walk that with Tom, and Tom gives hikes now and then, you're walking in the footsteps of Amherst and Burgoyne and Knox, all of these people that came and used that trail, and before them, so many indigenous. And I think we do have a couple of minutes, and I want to just mention something else that's on the trails. So this is Neuro in his writings. Knox Trail, a boundary marker or for some other purpose on somebody's farm, or Clark, 1858 on the map, it's Clark, located on the north side of the trail and west of a cellar hole. How many years has this marker been here? It is not a nut marker. It has been there for hundreds of years, maybe more. There are thousands of these in Sandusfield. There's an enclosure with, there's an enclosure that's it's kind of a secret, right? It's not a burial place, but there are more than 30 of these. They are animal effigies, turtles, they are serpents, the walls undulate. They were built over the centuries. Adjacent to this enclosure is a big hill, and there's Spectacle Pond over there. You can just see the teepees. For 6 months out of the year they would be here. They're only 40 miles away. There's plenty of game, plenty of trails, a lot of water. It was a perfect place.
So these are ceremonial stone.
These are ceremonial stone landscapes, CSLs. That's the university term for these kinds of things. And I see them every time I go. I have 100 acres not far away, and every time I go out and I look for them, there's another one, and another one, and another one. The colonials didn't harm them. So strange. There's a house that was built 100 feet away from this. Didn't take the stones. Why is that? Well, I have a theory. So if you've ever heard of places like Devil's Staircase or Satan's Kingdom or the Devil's this or the Devil's that, these were likely named by early ministers, Congregationalists, who did not understand indigenous people that were worshiping the ground and doing strange things and having ceremonies and building things like this. And they managed to convince the people, don't touch this stuff. Don't go there. This is my theory. I mean, how else could it be? They were superstitious that way. So I am proselytizing about ceremonial stone landscapes because you need to think of them as you would a 16th century or 17th century cemetery in Boston. It's sacred. And all of these things, some of them are just one big boulder with one stone on it. It's been there for hundreds of years, that one round stone on top of a big boulder, or 2 or 3 flat stones. Every stone placed had a prayer. It was some sort of remembrance or homage to Manitou. Manitou is a unique word in all the Algonquian indigenous tribes. There's hundreds and hundreds from Maine, from Canada down to Florida. And it means, it's the only word that is common to every single one of them. It means the Great Spirit, which they believe was in everything, inanimate, animate, every living thing, every tree, and their reason for existence. And so you would find, I didn't bring very many, I didn't think I'd get to this, but you would find triangular stones. We call them Manitou stones, especially if they have like a little head and shoulders appearance. These had great significance. There's possible celestial connections as well. I have a CSL wall, not a wall, it's an arrangement that lines up with the equinox. My son has a software program, and he dialed it in, and sure enough, it kind of fits. And it's just a stone wall without any context at all. It's just there for it. It's about 100 feet long. So there are all these things fascinating, and I think if you get out in the woods, maybe you will see the woods differently if you appreciate this.
So, Ron, walking in the woods, I've definitely seen a ton of stone structures like that. Are there any telltale signs on how we could discern, which one was built 100 years ago for logging fields versus?
I'm sure logging has taken its toll, but farming has not, at least not in Sanesville. Now, I know they have dated some of these structures in the Hudson River when it wasn't there, 3,000 years old. Wow. CSLs, until just very recently, were not really a legitimate cause for study by academics. Even today, there are people that say, "Oh, they were farmer walls," and no, they're not farmer. The Knox Trail has a lot of them. These little walls, and in the wintertime, today, if you were out there, how could you tell where a trail is? Well, maybe there's a wall nearby. The snow covers it, but at least you have that. So they're ubiquitous.
Charlie, Ron, there is a science using pollen, doing pollen count, and it's more accurate than carbon dating. And if you reach under some of the innocent rocks from the bottom and take a sample of dirt, maybe you can send it. There was a gentleman by the name of Mulholland, I think he was from Beckett, he was an anthropologist. He's the one that moved the Ice Age back by doing ore testings in swamps and using pollen count.
It's a little bit like UFOs, that nobody really wants, no academic who's got credentials wants to stake his career and his reputation on an area that it can't be proven in the scientific method. And there's nothing written. And even if there was, you couldn't maybe decipher all these languages. So it's an area that's just been left to be. And we don't think about it or talk about it. But I think also Native Americans right now are concentrating on repatriating their artifacts and materials and things that are in museums and libraries and whatever. They're concentrating on that. They would love to get their land back, and maybe one day something will happen like that. So they're not interested in this either. And even if those that I talk to have problems with other tribes kind of claiming, see, we don't have any Mohegans or very few Stockbridge Indians or some around, but the major tribes are down in Connecticut, the Narragansett and the Pequots and the Nashuntuckets. And so they have a claim, a social claim to this kind of thing, right? Well, nobody knows very much. That thing could be, it can't be less, it can't be more than 400 years, or I mean less than 400 years. And it can be as old as you can imagine. Less than 10,000, but...
How do you identify it? We became aware of ceremonial stone landscapes because of the pipeline coming through, and FEMA was required to have the native peoples or indigenous peoples come and evaluate and look for ceremonial stone landscapes.
Right.
And I actually asked the question, how do you know of one of the tribal elders? And he goes, well, you just feel it. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to prove.
They stopped trying to explain how they know in terms that the non-indigenous would understand. Right? They were trying to, well, it's old and it's so many. They stopped doing that. And they said, you know it when you see it, and I now know it when I see it. It gets tough with the walls because some of the walls might have the farmers might have incorporated some of the walls, especially on the roads, because the roads are old. But if you look at the way the English built their walls, they attempted to get symmetry, certain height, kind of a straight line, sort of flat top, And these walls in here are nothing like that at all. Nothing like that at all. There are holes. These are spirit holes. There are quartzite. You find it. And that was special significance as well. So there are these little clues, and all I can say is go out there and look around and you'll see what I mean. You start seeing these things, you'll say, wow, I am looking at something somebody hundreds of years ago put that, saying that we were here.
Could that be a trail?
I've hiked, I'm down in Colebrook, and there's a brook that goes through a ravine pretty deep. And I've hiked the other side. This was a couple of years ago. And there's a plateau, kind of flat, that overlooks the ravine and the river. And I run into 3 or 4 piles of stone like this, and it's kind of clear in there. And I'm standing there looking at it, saying, "What are these?" Same thing. It's relatively level and it's relatively flat. And I don't know, was it farms or who? So I'm looking at this.
Yeah, it wasn't farmers.
Yeah. So, but it kind of faces the piles. Kind of have a little saddle in them.
Yeah.
And I sat in one, and it's kind of facing south, or it's facing east. So there you go.
It's a big mystery. You'll enjoy your walk in the woods, walks of discovery, to find these things, and maybe nobody else has seen it for a long time, or even acknowledged it. And you're acknowledging that someone built that. It's highly unlikely that farmers did it. They did you know that the March was called the starving month around here? They just about run out of food. They had dried peas maybe or something. And building stone walls for fun was not exactly high on the priority.
Well, I mean, are they going to build a wall, or are they going to throw the rocks in a convenient pile of rubble?
Yeah, the farmers did that. Farmers did that. Yeah.
So,
Farmers did that. Farmers did not do that. And a lot of the turtle is the most common effigy. So the turtle is very close to the ground, along with serpents, and there's even fish. Just use your imagination. It could run away with you as you start to see things that aren't there, and you get caught up in this thing. But it's real.
So did you say that was a trail marker?
That's what Nuro said.
Is that a trail marker?
Yeah, he's called it a trail marker.
Okay.
So even he, in 1966, is way before any of this started to have a substance, suspected something. Trail marker or for some other purpose, right? Or the purpose was ceremonial.
Is there another word, or are there any other Indian words that would be used for this ceremonial monument when we find them, or do we not know that?
I don't know that. Actually, that's a good point. We have all these names of the Knox Trail or the Great Road or whatever it is. Where's the Indian name?
The reason I'm asking is because the Nahuatl language, which is an Aztec tongue,
Yeah.
and Spanish language. When the Spaniards were founding South America, Mexico City, they didn't know the culture or the Nahuatl language. And so for a few hundred years, it was misinterpreted.
Sure.
And until it was discovered that there is a language and there were some scholars who learned it. So there must be some Indian dialects that would...
There must be, but the problem that pile of stones has is that there's nothing written about it. And so how does the scientists today, how do they put any sort of approbation on there?
Is it clearly Algonquin, or could there be
Well,
other...
all these tribes are Algonquin. Mohegans, Iroquois, Micmac, there's hundreds. And there's Algonquian nation. Tom?
Is that still there?
I don't know. I just got this from the Athenaeum just yesterday.
So you and he'll have to go look.
We'll have to go look. I'll bet you.
And then there's one more really significant rock.
Oh, yeah, there's one more. Okay, so here's Abiel's rock, and you'll hear more about this next week because Tom's going to be giving a talk about his section of it. But this is in Sandusfield, and it's also right on the trail. Would have been a marker for Native Americans for centuries. They saw that, I'm in the right place. And it was a marker in 1764 when Nathaniel Austin did his survey. And so it's very impressive, and it's very historic.
Something this big and pointed like that would probably be considered a
Manitou. Right. So it's everywhere in the woods here. So thank you very much. So thank you, Ron. Thank you, Gene. Thank you all for coming. As Ron mentioned, next week is the fourth and final of this series of talks. And Tom Ragusa is going to talk about his 20-year, roughly, experience in locating, mapping, reproducing, and documenting the Knox Trail through Sandusfield and Otis. And as the book that was mentioned, the longest original section of the trail in Berkshire County is about 8 miles long. That's essentially undisturbed from the 18th century. So come on back next week, and we look forward to seeing you. Thanks very much.
And when the book